With the recent update to Shallot, I wanted to go back and do another video because it had been a while talking about all of the best special move cards for Shallot in Dragon Ball Legends. So I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you find this video helpful and informative, be sure to hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button. So for today's video, we're going to start off by talking about the top 10 in no particular order for the record. Then after that, we're going to come back and talk about some honorable mentions and other ones you guys should consider. For example, there are going to be some variants of some of these good ones that have cheaper variants on some other characters. There is a really long and expansive list of special moves that I own and don't own, but thankfully, we have the ability to read all the details. So I hope that you guys enjoy, and without further ado, let's get into the list. And before we move on, no, I didn't forget about these cards. I want to mention these really quickly in one order because they all do something similar. They're going to have differences in how much damage they're going to do, so make the decision based on what you like. But all of the blue cards, like this one on LF Rose, where they are doing multiple things to enemies, are really strong. Now, I didn't put any value in nullifying unfavorable element factors because Shallot is never going to have that. I guess unless you're in story mode, I guess. Anyway, I didn't put any value in that in my list, but these ones here that do a portion of the damage to the allied characters that the enemy has are really strong. Some of the ones to note are going to be Yellow Sin. Shenron has one, the LF Rose here, LF Frieza, the yellow one, and also Red Kid Buu. There are probably a couple of other ones. Some of those ones I mentioned are going to be weaker. Yellow Sins is weaker, but has an interesting little gimmick where it has a chance to also remove a Dragon Ball, so maybe you consider that one if you don't care as much about the damage only, but definitely don't want to move on from these, as these are some of the more powerful ones because they can do damage to 3 enemies at one time. So let me know in the comments down below first, which ones you think are the best. Rank your top 10 or whatever, at least top 3 if you can. Rank your top special move cards for Shallot that you guys think. Next, I want to mention a couple of really quick important things to know when it comes to Shallot. For the record, the list is for the most part pretty fluid throughout all of the different forms for Shallot. However, there are some different things that you would want to consider when it comes to some of the Shallots. For example, some cards that draw green cards, while they're going to be really good for you on other Shallots, they're going to be especially good on Super Saiyan God or Super Saiyan 1, the Shallot forms that have really strong green card effects. For example, Super Saiyan 1 gets a particularly strong bonus from having Blazing Crane Strike, for example, because this will draw a special arts card next. Note, it's special arts, not special move. But if you look at the special arts, which is the green card here, his green card draws a blue card next, so they loop each other, which is hilarious. So using this will give him Blazing Crane Strike, and then also the opposite is true. So Blazing Crane Strike giving him a green is very nice. Anyway, it activates twice here, and this one has a lot of stuff that happens, including giving him 3 Vanish Gauge restorations of up to 70%. So Blazing Crane Strike is an incredibly powerful one, and there are some other ones like it, so keep that in mind. However, if we look at, for example, base Shallot, his green is okay. It, draws a strike and stuff like that, so it's still a good one for him. But we look at Super Saiyan 2 Shallot, and you start to see kind of a dip, right? This is some solid stuff. You can really make a case for it, but it's not really the same offensive utility as some of the other ones, like, getting a Vanish back or things like that. And Super Saiyan 3 probably has the least powerful of them, draws a strike, gets some other stuff happening here too. But again, you see what I'm kind of talking about. So you can maybe make arguments for different forms. Next, when we talk about special moves for Shallot, you really have to make note of numerous things. The first thing, if you're choosing your own outside of the list, is to consider the modifier. Major is a okay modifier. It's probably the most common one, but you are obviously going to want to look for something more than that or more powerful than that, and that will be massive. I don't believe there's any supreme ones that are teachable to Shallot, but massive is what you're really looking for. Next, you're looking for if the special move arts power goes up. Super Kamehameha is always going to be one of the strongest blue cards you can ever teach Shallot in the game, and it coincidentally comes from a character that was released on launch with Dragon Ball Legends 5 years ago. Anyway, because it has a massive 100% special move arts power bonus for 15 counts. That is an incredible bonus to give Shallot, so those are the things that you're looking for when it comes to this. Next, you'll notice with some of the other ones, like Soul Punisher here, which has massive damage, also special move damage is different than special move arts power, a little bit different. Anyway, 25% of that, and it also has a negative effect applied here too. Some of the other blue cards you're going to see are going to be trading off some of these things. They will, for example, maybe not get damage. They'll get a different type of damage, like strike only or something like that. Some of them won't have anything like that, but they'll have really, really strong utility effects like paralysis or faint or reducing sub count or card destroy or various other debuffs that you will be applying. So without further ado, with all the qualifiers in the way, out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. So I already mentioned Super Kamehameha. This is one of the best blue cards for Shallot overall, right? So 100% up, I already talked about it. Very, very strong, very hard hitting, and going to be very good on Shallot just for pure damage, right? You really have to understand what you're going for. Are you going for utility? Are you going for damage? Are you going for some blend of the two? That's what you kind of need to consider. Those are the things you need to consider. I already also talked about Blazing Crane Strike. This is the one that I have equipped, but it does massive impact damage. It draws a green. It bonuses your crit rate. I'm not really too worried about that, but it has blast armor on it. So for me personally, I put a really high importance on blue cards that dash in, like this one will, and they also have blast armor as well. So if they dash in, that's a bonus. If they have blast armor, that has a lot more of a bonus, because that opens up a world of situations to you that you wouldn't have otherwise had. There are situations in stop clocks or things like that where you can really gain value out of having a dash in blue card with blast armor on it. So for me, this is probably my #1 favorite, and if I were to recommend, this is the one that I would recommend. As you see, that is on blue Sparking TN there. Obviously, you guys probably won't have that or may not have that. Let's talk about another one here, and that one is going to be on blue Android 17. Very, very similar card, except there are some trade-offs. Massive impact, draws green, restores your key, but this one is not a dash in blue with blast armor and all that. This is a long range beam based attack, which also has its merits. Those types of cards are really, really good in other stop clock situations or other things like that, particularly, as you would imagine, from a distance, right? So this is another one of the top ones I would recommend. And for a budget option on one of these ones that's drawing a green, consider EX Deborah. He also has one like this as well. Also, when it comes to pure damage, the pure damage of this one has always been one that's very, very, very high on the totem pole. 75% instead of 100 to special move Arts Power here. Now, I believe with this type of blue card and the other ones that are like it, like Blazing Crane Strike, for example, they're going to be scaling based off of strike attack versus the beam based ones scaling damage versus blast arts damage, so, or blast arts attack as the stats. So that's another thing to consider. The Shallots are, they're pretty much all melee, I believe, so you know, you probably want to stick to melee dash based blue cards overall. But Revolt Pile here is really, really strong. Again, 75 instead of 100. I haven't tested this on Sparking. I did get a lot of utility out of this on Hero, and when we did this type of video years ago, when Hero was the only one, this was the one that every single person was running, basically. It was either this or the blue Kamehameha or Super Kamehameha on the Goku that we talked about earlier. And then there was some other ones that we haven't got to yet, but for the most part, this was very, very common, and it should be a really good hard-hitting one. Next, we're going to move to some other hard-hitting melee-based ones, and the next one up on our list is going to be the green Goku here. This is a really strong one, actually. You probably have seen it before. It always hits like a truck because this one has the ability to do minus 100% to enemy sustained damage cut effects for 3 counts on activation. Basically means that if they have damage cut, he's hitting right through it, right? And that's the only real means of defense for 99.9% of the characters. Some characters are now doing arts power debuffs, but nonetheless, this is a really, really hard-hitting one. And again, I put importance on having that blast armor as well as a dash-in blue card. This one will hit really hard, especially with the massive modifier on it. So do not, by any means, sleep on this one. And if you're looking for a kind of a budget or alternate option, Shining Blow here does some of the same stuff. It just, albeit a little bit different, but is a very equivalent type of blue card. Next, we're going to move over to this guy here. Has been the thorn in my side since forever. Death Ball on Chilled. Massive damage, so that's a bonus, and 100% chance to inflict paralyze on hit. There are some other paralyzing blue cards. For example, Green Kid Buu, I'll talk about him in a minute. I believe he has a blue card, excuse me, that has the ability to do 100% paralysis chance too, but it is going to be a major modifier. However, the trade-off is that it can not get nullified by most others, and what that means is that it's going to be a harder hitting, well, what that really means is that, like, if you clashed with if you guys threw them at the same time, because it wouldn't trigger a clash animation, but if you threw Death Ball and they threw that Kid Buu blue card at the same time, your Death Ball will get canceled out, right? There are just like supernova type of hits that are just gonna cancel out weaker type of attacks, basically. So anyway, Death Ball, though, nonetheless, massive modifier with 100%, very short and sweet, but do not sleep on this one at all by any means. We're now going to move over to another LOE character, and this one is going to be, actually, he was actually just on the list. One of my personal favorites, and one you probably won't see all too often, is going to be, Purple Frieza, wherever he's at. I don't see him. Here he is. The Death Beam here is really interesting. For one, it costs 40 instead of 50. So that, to me, is a huge bonus, and you get 15 ki back. Now, it only does Major Pierce. It's an extremely fast animation, too. So that's another thing to consider, is when you're using these is like the activation time. Most of these on this list are going to have the same activation times, though, because they're either going to be dash-in blues or whatever, right? But you do also want to consider that. That's why, like, one of the ones that's really solid isn't going to be on my list, and that's Purple Full Power Transforming Broly's. His is really strong, but it's not on my list because it's a pretty long animation, if I recall. Anyway, randomly draws a new card. For the record, that could be another blue, that could be a green, it could be whatever. So kind of similar to the 17 one, but just not guaranteed, right? We're gonna move from here though over to another Frieza, who I could have just skipped to this, but yeah, we have another Frieza right here, and this Frieza is pretty awesome. I believe this is the only teachable special move in the game. There might be one other that I might have missed, but I literally sat here and went through every single one. So for all intents and purposes, I believe this is the only one you are going to find on the list that has the ability to nullify endurance. Most of the blue cards that nullify endurance are on LFs or whatever, and they're just not teachable. Very, very high on the list because of the fact that it nullifies endurance. It's a long-ranged one, also has heavy bleed, 100% chance. It's not going to do the most damage, but in this case, we're going for utility. We don't care about that. Nullifying endurance is an incredibly powerful effect. I would be remiss not to mention this. So, Yellow Frieza, again, I believe is the only one that has this in the game. Full Power Frieza with the Death Saucer there. We're now going to move over to a couple of older characters that really shook up the meta once upon a time. Actually, no. This I'm looking at the wrong Gogeta on my list. I'll get to that one later. We have Blue Gogeta, so never mind. He's not. I mean, he did shake up the meta. He is kind of old now. Massive impact, plus 20% special move, destroys all your enemies' cards on hit while also having blast armor. So pretty straightforward stuff. We've already talked about all the merits that has. Destroying all your enemies' cards is the first time we're seeing this in the video. Really strong, and you can imagine why. Maybe you get a very high value card that they were looking forward to using, like a green card or a blue card or an ultimate, ideally, you know, things like that, and you just force them to reload. So overall, very powerful. Next, we're going to look at another blue here, Blaster Shell Broly. Yeah, 30% chance to inflict feint is actually really high. Most of the time it's going to be at 20%. So this is going to land a feint very often. And then also does a debuff for strike. We don't really worry about the rest of that stuff. It's just a feint chance that you're looking for here. So that's always kept this as a very relevant and common one. So we went through 10 so far, if you didn't notice. Hey guys, Future D Free here, and I noticed that as I went through my next portion of this video that there were actually some updated versions to some of the blue cards that made their way onto my list that were definitely worth mention. First and foremost, I want to shine a spotlight on Green Sparking Yamcha's Wolfang Fist. It's similar to the Blazing Crane Strike, however it doesn't have blast armor, but it does draw a green card as well. I also wanted to shine the spotlight on the Green Metal Cooler's Blitz Barrage, in which it has the ability to remove enemies' buff effects, unlike the Blue Broly Blaster Shell, meaning that it has the chance to actually land a feint on characters that would otherwise be immune to them. We're also going to take a look at Ultra Vegito's Final Strike, which should be on the list over LF First Form Frieza's blue card, because it's just an enhanced version of that, albeit being a strike-based attack instead of a blast one. And I also wanted to shine a spotlight on Red EX Majube's Majin Beam, which is basically an enhanced version of Chilled. So really, I should redo that entire intro and change those 4 cards for these cards, but it's all right. You guys heard it here. So the updated list would be the ones that I just mentioned: the Red Super Goku Kamehameha, the Red Goku Super Kamehameha, the Blazing Crane Strike, the LF-17, the Revolt Pile, which I still like a lot, the Green Cooler Movie Goku's Dragon Fist. We also had the non-LF Full Power Frieza with his Nullify Endurance effect, the Soul Strike on Ultra Gogeta as well, and then the 4 that we just mentioned here. First up is the LF Gogeta Blues Stardust Shooter, dealing massive impact damage and plus 30% damage inflicted for 15 counts. Note, this is general damage and not any other kind of damage. This is a really strong buff. It's not special move exclusive or whatever, so that means that there's utility to this. After the blue card, you are going to be hitting for another 30% damage. Also does a health restoration debuff as well. Definitely a thumbs up. And next up is the LF Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Lightning speed, or light speed, 10 times Kamehameha, massive impact, applies the following effects to self. And this is 30% special move damage and cancels downgrades while also having blast armor here too. And here is another one of my personal favorites, and this one is the Gallic Gun on the purple Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta from the Future Saga. This one is kind of unique because it increases special move damage for allies or your buddy upon activation. Now, this one is a little bit different, and if you want to get an alternative to this, LF Trunks, the blue one from Dragon Ball Super, he does, I believe, a 30% damage inflicted, special move damage inflicted for your allies. However, it's only for 15 counts. This effect is cancelable if the enemy has an effect that cancels attribute upgrades or whatever. But for all intents and purposes, otherwise, this is going to be anytime you proc this, and some of these are going to get, some of these characters, for example, are going to get their blue cards kind of consistently. I didn't even talk about God Shallot and how he's really good for the record with Blazing Crane Strike because he draws the greens and the green. I meant to mention that. But yeah, God Shallot is particularly really strong with the greens. Anyway, but if you were to use this on like the Super Saiyan 1 Shallot, where he, using his green card, can draw the blue cards, and then you can consistently get this. So the more you use this, you just keep making everybody's blue cards hit harder and harder unless those attribute upgrades are canceled out. So overall, a bonus to me. I mentioned him earlier, but Green Kid Buu has the Planet Burst, which does major damage, 100% chance to inflict, and cannot be nullified by most other special moves. And here's Mr. Holy Trinity himself, Red Gogeta here. Massive explode damage, 25% special move damage, and a 20% feint chance. So very similar to the Broly one, but again, 20% instead of 30, albeit a little bit, actually a decent bit stronger in terms of damage. Next up is one you possibly weren't even expecting to see on the list, and that is Blue Lord Slug. This one is really strong. Major explode damage, reduces enemies' ki by 50, and has a 100% chance to inflict paralyze. So yeah, this is going to be a really annoying blue card to get hit with. We also have EX Evil Buu with his Guilty Flash, dealing 70% to his own special move arts power upon activation, and strong poison on hit. Very strong. Couple of things to note. It is a dash-in based blue card. It unfortunately does not have blast armor. That was one thing that's really needed on Zenkai. They didn't give it to him, albeit 70%, and then also the chip damage from poison is very strong. Last little knock is it only has a major modifier, so when they do the high damage inflicted bonuses like 70% and stuff like that, most of the cards don't have anything above 50. In fact, most of them don't have anything above 30, but when they do that, they oftentimes compensate by reducing the damage modifier from, you know, massive or whatever down to major, and unfortunately that's the trade-off, and in this case that's what's happening here, but this is still a solid one. Speaking of Zenkais, if I'm not mistaken, I think this one got a really big buff when Green Piccolo got his Zenkai Awakening. This is actually a really solid blue card that you will probably not see all too often and will catch people off guard. What it does, major modifier, again, major right there, so that's another thing that's happening. Like I mentioned earlier, when they start doing a lot of things, they probably just stick to having a major modifier. However, this one does the 50% to enemy sustained damage cut effect when changing cover. So it's just like that Goku one from earlier that did 100%, except it's way weaker because it doesn't do 100, it does 50 instead, and it's only when their cover changing. So there are some restrictions on it. Also, when it hits, it does do a debuff to the enemy, so allow for them to take 20% more damage for 15 counts, while also doing a heavy bleed, so more chip damage as well. And I mentioned him earlier. Here's Red Deborah's, where he just basically does damage and draws a green card next. So I wanted to mention next, after that, we did have EX Maj Oob. So he's right here with the Majin Beam. And this one is pretty interesting. An EX character, by the way. Massive impact. plus 20% strike damage debuff on the enemy, and then 100% chance to inflict paralyze. So you're seeing here literally a better version of Chilled. However, I put Chilled up top because it had massive, and I didn't realize this one also had massive. So this one should just be over there, and Chilled should be the budget option at this point. But yeah, so this one is really, really good. I did not catch that it had massive, so don't sleep on this one as well. Next up is another utility one that's not too great, but you can maybe use it in spurts, and this is EX Baby's Big Bang Attack, which does a restore of 50% of your vanishing gauge. And here we have another one that's actually really, really good that you probably won't see all too often either, but this one will also catch people really off guard. This should have been, if I were doing a ranking, this would have been probably like 11 or 12 for the record. This one is really good, should have been higher on my list. But for the record, these ones I'm mentioning now after the Blue Broly Blaster Shell, these ones are not in any particular order. They're just in a list, right? This one, major impact damage, inflicts forced switching. Most of the time, force switching is going to be on like a green card or something. Force switching. So this has insane utility that we're not seeing on pretty much any other blue card. And it has blast armor. So a lot of utility in one little bundle here from our guy, the one and only EX Shugesh. This one is probably the only AoE blue card in the entire list that makes it on my list, or in this video, because this one has some interesting utility by reducing enemy's ki by a full 100% or 100 on hit, and this is from the EX Android 17. The next one we have here is one you probably won't see as well. Ki Burst Kick from the Blue Goku Black, massive damage, and then on hit does a 100% health debuff or health restoration debuff to enemies, and also inflicts all enemies with 3 subcounts, meaning that it takes them another 3 counts to switch their characters. You can imagine why that has really good utility, and it also further has blast armor as well. And next we have a blue card from the Android 17 that came out in the GT buffs, I believe last year. He has the ability to do some pretty fun stuff with the Power Blitz right here. Massive damage, plus 20% special move damage, destroys all of your enemies' blue and green cards. So destroying all your enemies' cards is something that we've seen before. This is a little bit different because it has specific targeting in it. Now, there are other blue cards that do specific targeting, like strikes, or maybe they'll seal cards or whatever that are just not going to be on my list. But I do have enhanced value on destroying the enemy's special cards because they have the most utility out of everything that they're going to have in their hand. You could make an argument this one also should have been higher on the list, but again, we're not in any order here. Final Strike from Ultra Vegito. Massive impact damage, restores ki on activation, randomly draws up to 4 new cards, and gives blast armor. So a full card reload. Not a very common effect at all in the game, and he does it on a blue card consistently. Very strong here, and like I mentioned earlier with some of the other cards, this one has the ability to force other utility cards in your hand. This one is basically the LF Frieza one that I mentioned earlier, kind of on, enhancements there. I could have mentioned this one in its place. Another mishap by me. I was kind of jaded by my own bias towards the Frieza one. I really like that one, especially because it's also weaker, or in terms of, it's weaker, but it costs less, excuse me. So the first form Frieza did the thing where he draws 1 new card, and I talked about how that could be a green card or something. You have an enhanced chance of getting another green or blue card if you were reloading your entire hand. So keep that in mind. Very, very strong. This is our second one in my honorable mention that could have actually been in the top 10. Flame Bullet Tour on the EX Tora. Shortens ally subcount by 2. That's the only thing we're looking at here. Means that it's the opposite of the effect we saw a couple of characters ago. Means your characters can switch 2 counts faster. There are some other ones in the game that do this, but this one was the one that really caught my eye. Alright guys, the list is winding down, so hope that you guys have enjoyed it thus far. We have a few left, so be sure to hit that thumbs up and that subscribe button. Alright guys, here's the next one that we have. So for right here we have Green Metal Cooler. This one is one that I think is going to also catch a lot of people off guard. Major explode damage, cancels buff effects, and has a chance to do feint. Canceling buff effects means, unlike Broly's, when this one hits the enemy, unlike Blue Broly with the Blaster Shell or whoever else we've talked about with feint like Gogeta, this means that if they have an ability to be immune to feint, this one can actually get through if it hits the chance. So very powerful because it's canceling the buff to be immune. I kind of feel like this one could be on the list too. Is this a third one that could have been on my list? I have to go back and look at Blaster Shell again. But you know what? I think that with some of those blue cards, I'm going to admit it here, not so much the bias thing. I think with some of those blue cards, we've just seen better versions come out. And I looked at all of these first, obviously, because I know which ones I'm liking. But I looked at all of these, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm used to these ones that have traditionally been the good ones. But I'm seeing some just updated versions of them. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. Unless Blaster Shell did something, it did do a strike debuff. But I mean, the chance to guarantee the feint, if it hits the 20% anyway, is just more important, right? If they're immune. So I would have this, again, our third one on the list. So since we're making a lot of changes, I think I'm going to go back and make an amendment from future D-Free here from this point of the video and put it in the intro so you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. But I really like this yellow Goku's Super Kamehameha. We talked about this effect earlier, except this is a stronger version of it. So Sword's sub-count, but it has massive on it. We have another Goku here with the red Super Saiyan blue one and his Super God combination here. So this is really missing blast armor, and I think that's holding this back from being an incredibly good one. So if he gets a Zenkai, I think that this is jumping up the list if it gets a Zenkai, or it gets blast armor, and if it goes up from 40% by at all, like 50, 60, 70, this one goes up the list. But massive impact, restores Vanish Gauge, very nice, especially because, like I mentioned earlier, this one should do more damage on your strike-based teams and builds than those blast ones or whatever. And of note, an alternative to this for a blast-based team with that in mind would be purple Janembas. Keep that too. And the last one on our list is actually extremely similar to the Blazing Crane Strike. This is the Wolffang Fist on the green Sparking Yamcha. It draws a green, doesn't have blast armor, but has the chip damage as well with the major modifier. So this is the last one on our list. I am going to go back and mention some of these earlier in the video so you guys are aware of what's kind of happening here. But I hope that you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button for more content. And I'll see you all in the next one, guys. Take it easy.